The royal court of the Celestian Empire had conquered 17 star systems, 3 artificial suns, and 1 minor god. It had never, however, conquered silence. Silence ruled the chamber now. Marble-like crystal pillars shimmered with trapped starlight. War banners, stitched from the hides of extinct beasts, hung high above. Generals in plated exoskeleton armor stood in rigid lines, their metals clinking like restrained violence. Nobles watched from floating balconies, their many eyes gleaming with curiosity. At the center of it all sat the royal queen. Her crown was not ornamental, it was structural, a living circlet of adaptive metal that adjusted to her neural pulses. Her gaze alone had ended rebellions. Her voice had authorized planetary sieges before breakfast. And before her stood a human. No armor. No visible weapon. No ceremonial blade. Just a dark formal suit, hands loosely clasped behind his back, posture relaxed in a room built to intimidate. Whispers rippled through the court. That is their representative? He looks employed. Does he molt? The queen studied him the way predators study things that might taste disappointing. Human, she began, her voice smooth and cutting. Your species petitions for expanded trade corridors and diplomatic access within imperial space. He inclined his head politely. We prefer to call it cooperation. A general snorted. They prefer to rename everything. The queen's lips curved, not into a smile, but into an assessment. You arrive without fleet. Without visible leverage. Without tribute. A pause. Then she leaned forward slightly. Tell me, she said, the faintest scoff touching her tone. How many wars have you fought, human? Laughter erupted, layered, echoing, multi-throated. The question was not curiosity. It was dismissal. The human did not react immediately. He let the laughter crest. Let it settle. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, conversational. Enough to know victory doesn't always require weapons. The laughter thinned. The queen's eyes narrowed just slightly. We measure power in fleets. In orbital superiority. In surrendered banners. We measure it too, the human replied. We just don't always measure it in bodies. A murmur traveled through the chamber. One of the admirals stepped forward, armor plates shifting. Clarify. How many battle campaigns have you commanded? The human tilted his head. Political? He asked mildly. Economic? Cultural? The general blinked. Military. Ah. The human nodded. Fewer than we've survived. The queen's circlet pulsed faintly, an involuntary neural spike. You avoid the question. Not at all, Your Majesty. I simply require a definition. Her fingers tapped the arm of her throne. War, she said slowly, is organized violence to secure dominance. The human's lips twitched. On Earth, he replied, we have a broader understanding of dominance. The chambers shifted, attention sharpening. He continued, voice smooth. We've fought trade wars that bankrupted rivals without firing a shot. We've waged information wars that toppled leaders without deploying a soldier. We've run campaigns that conquered populations who thanked us afterward. A ripple of confusion moved through the court. Campaigns? One noble repeated suspiciously. You mean invasions? Elections? The human corrected gently. A few alien scholars began whispering rapidly. The queen's gaze hardened. You claim governance is warfare? On our world? He smiled faintly. Everything competitive eventually becomes one. The generals bristled. And how many conquests? She pressed. Have you achieved? The human considered. Depends on whether you count markets. Markets? An admiral repeated flatly. Yes. Entire economies reshaped. Preferences altered. Supply chains redirected. He paused. Consumers converted. The word convert lingered. You enslave populations to commerce? Someone hissed. We persuade them, he said. There's a difference. Consent scales better. A few gasps. One of the younger nobles choked back laughter. The queen's eyes locked onto him. Submission, then? How often have your enemies submitted? The human met her gaze evenly. More often when they believed it was their idea. Silence returned, thicker now. You speak in riddles, the Queen said. No, Your Majesty. I speak in strategy. She rose from her throne slowly, descending the steps with controlled grace. Even her movement radiated authority. The court parted instinctively as she approached him. You stand in a hall built by conquest, she said, circling him. Every pillar represents a world taken by force. Every banner marks resistance crushed. She stopped in front of him. And you imply your species competes? He didn't step back. We imply, he said softly, that there are faster ways to secure loyalty than fear. A general barked a harsh laugh. Fear is efficient. For a while, the human agreed. So is attraction. The Queen's brow lifted slightly. Attraction? She echoed. We export entertainment, fashion, language, technology, ideals. His tone remained steady. We've seen entire regions realign themselves just to gain access. You're describing infiltration. An intelligence officer snapped. The human shook his head. Infiltration implies deception. We prefer aspiration. The Queen's gaze sharpened. You think aspiration is stronger than force? Stronger? He gave a small shrug. No. But it's quieter. He gestured subtly around the hall. No destroyed infrastructure. No rebuilding costs. No insurgencies. A beat. Just adoption. The court processed that. You expect us to believe, the Queen said coolly, that your species achieves dominance without battle? The human smiled, not arrogantly, but knowingly. Oh, we battle constantly, he replied. Just not always with fleets. He began counting lightly on his fingers. Elections. Corporate takeovers. Trade negotiations. Media influence. Social movements. Public opinion. His gaze flicked up. Marriage contracts, if you want to be historical about it. A few nobles coughed. You equate matrimony with war? The Queen asked. On Earth? He let the pause stretch. It has toppled empires. A ripple of restrained laughter spread, dangerous, amused. The Queen's eyes lingered on him longer now. Less dismissive. More analytical. You are not a soldier, she observed. No. Yet you speak of conquest. I'm a diplomat. And that, she said slowly, is your weapon? He met her stare. Influence is lighter to carry. The statement lingered in the air like a blade sheathed but visible. One of the elder warlords stepped forward, irritation flaring. We have reduced civilizations to ash. We have bombarded continents. The human nodded respectfully. Impressive. Impressive? The warlord growled. Yes. He smiled faintly. But temporary. A stir. Even the Queen stilled. Temporary, she repeated. Force creates resistance, he said calmly. Influence creates alignment. One requires constant suppression. The other sustains itself. The Queen studied him in silence, then spoke quietly. And how many wars have you personally fought, human? This time, the question carried weight. He held her gaze. Enough, he said, voice even. To know that the most decisive victories are the ones where no one realizes they've lost. Silence. No laughter. No scoffing. Just the faint hum of starlight trapped in crystal pillars. The Queen slowly returned to her throne. She did not smile. She did not sneer. But she no longer looked amused. So, she said at last, voice measured, you claim humanity wages war without fighting. The human inclined his head slightly. We prefer wars, he replied, where everyone believes they're winning. And for the first time since he entered the chamber, no one laughed. The Queen did not sit back this time. Explain, she said. The human nodded once, as if she had just approved a budget instead of demanding justification for an entire species. You asked how many wars we fought, he began. Let's start with the quiet ones. A war minister folded his armored arms. If it is quiet, it is not war. The human smiled faintly. On Earth, minister, the quiet wars are the expensive ones. A few translators flickered, recalibrating. Trade, he continued. We've strangled rivals with tariffs instead of torpedoes. Crippled supply lines with sanctions instead of siege engines. Collapsed currencies without firing a single shot. The court shifted uneasily. A financial advisor to the throne leaned forward. You destabilize economies deliberately? Of course, the human replied lightly. You call it invasion. We call it negotiation with leverage. You weaponize paperwork? A general asked in disbelief. Relentlessly. A thin ripple of restrained laughter passed through the lower ranks. The generals did not join it. We've toppled industries, the human went on. Redirected global markets. Made entire populations dependent on our exports. He shrugged. It's amazing what happens when everyone wants what you produce. The Queen's gaze sharpened. And what do you produce, human? He held her stare. Desire. Silence again. We package it as technology. As entertainment. As opportunity. But underneath? He spread his hands slightly. It's desire. A scholar near the back whispered. Mimetic manipulation. We prefer the term branding. The human corrected smoothly. One of the admirals let out a low hiss. You infect cultures. We collaborate with them, he replied. They keep what they like. And if they like everything? Then we don't need to conquer them. The Queen tapped her throne once. Continue. He inclined his head. Alliance marriages, he said. A few nobles perked up at that. You bind territories through reproduction? A matriarch asked with open interest. Historically, the human replied. Kings and queens secured peace by marrying rivals. Bloodlines intertwined. Claims merged. Conflicts dissolved in shared heirs. He paused, then added casually. Today we do the same thing. We just call it mergers. The word rippled across the chamber. Mergers, a trade lord repeated carefully. Corporations combine. Assets integrate. Power consolidates. Suddenly your competitor is your partner. He smiled slightly. Very intimate arrangement. The Queen's eyes flickered with something almost amused. And who dominates in these intimate arrangements? Whoever negotiates better terms. A few nobles choked on contained laughter. You reduce conquest to contract language? An elder general scoffed. We refine it, the human replied. Why destroy a rival when you can acquire them? The word acquire landed heavily. You consume them, the general accused. We invest, the human corrected. Semantics. Strategy. The Queen leaned forward. And if they refuse? Then we outcompete them until refusal becomes expensive. He let that settle. We've fought entire corporate wars lasting decades. Advertising campaigns sharper than blades. Lawsuits bloodier than skirmishes. Lobbying battles where reputations died publicly. You assassinate reputations? An intelligence officer asked. Only when necessary. A faint ripple of dark amusement spread. And this is victory to you? The Queen asked. Victory, he replied, is achieving your objective with minimal collateral damage. A warlord snorted. Collateral damage builds fear. Fear builds resentment, the human replied. Resentment fuels rebellion. Rebellion requires suppression. Suppression drains resources. He tilted his head slightly. We prefer efficiency. The Queen's gaze lingered on him. You describe dominance as though it were seduction. The human's expression remained composed. Dominance lasts longer when it feels voluntary. A few audible inhales swept through the court. You imply, the Queen said slowly, that your enemies choose to submit. They choose comfort. He corrected. They choose access. They choose prosperity. And you provide this? In exchange for influence. The word influence seemed to disturb them more than any mention of fleets. A young noble spoke up hesitantly. Our analysts report your species exports large quantities of visual entertainment. The human's smile deepened. We do. And these narratives alter fashion, language patterns, even courtship rituals in neighboring systems. We're flattered. You destabilize cultural purity, the noble pressed. We evolve it, the human replied. A scholar stepped forward. Our youth have adopted human idioms. Some request Earth-style celebrations. One province has attempted what is the term? Democratic process. The human winced playfully. That one can get messy. You spread ideology. We share options. The Queen studied him closely. And what do you gain from these options? Alignment. Submission, she corrected. He met her gaze without flinching. Partnership. Her circlet pulsed faintly again. You speak boldly for a species without visible armament. He shrugged slightly. We have armaments. We simply don't lead with them. And if influence fails? It rarely does. That was not the question. His expression sharpened subtly. If influence fails, we still remember how to fight. The room cooled. A general leaned forward. You claim military capability now? We survived 2 global wars before we reached your level of propulsion, he replied evenly. We industrialized conflict. Mechanized it. Weaponized entire economies. The court went still. And then? The Queen asked. Then we learned it was inefficient. You expect us to believe your species abandoned open warfare? Not abandoned, he said carefully. Evolved. He let his gaze sweep the chamber. You measure strength in how loudly you can dominate. We measure it in how quietly we can. And what do you call this quiet domination? The Queen asked. He paused deliberately. Soft power. A few nobles murmured at the phrase. There is nothing soft about power, a warlord growled. The human's lips curved slightly. That depends on how it's applied. The tension edged toward dangerous. You flirt with arrogance, the Queen observed. Confidence, he corrected gently. She studied him another long moment. And how many such wars have you personally fought? He exhaled through his nose softly, as if amused by the simplicity of the question. I've negotiated trade disputes between rival blocs. Managed media crises that could have triggered armed retaliation. Structured agreements that prevented military escalation. He tilted his head. I've campaigned. Campaign, the Queen repeated carefully. Persuasion at scale, he clarified. Convincing millions to support an idea. Mobilizing resources without coercion. And if they refuse to support it? We try again, he replied. Different messaging. Different framing. Different incentives. You adapt. We iterate. The court exchanged uneasy glances. You treat governance as competition, an elder noble said. It is. You treat dominance as performance. It is. You treat war as negotiation. Sometimes it is. Silence returned, heavier now, not mocking, but calculating. The Queen's voice dropped slightly. You suggest that my empire could be conquered without invasion. The human shook his head slowly. Not conquered, he said. Influenced. Her eyes narrowed. And you believe you could influence us? He held her gaze steadily. Your Majesty, he said, voice calm and unwavering. You invited us here. No one spoke. You requested trade discussions, he continued. Cultural exchange proposals. Joint research initiatives. A subtle beat. You opened the door. The realization moved like a shadow across the chamber. One of the scholars whispered, almost to himself. Exposure precedes integration. The human did not deny it. The Queen's voice was quiet now, controlled. You describe infiltration with courtesy. We call it diplomacy. And you believe diplomacy wins wars? He met her eyes one final time in that exchange. No, he said. Diplomacy prevents the expensive ones. Silence stretched. The laughter from earlier felt distant, almost naive. The Queen leaned back slowly, studying the human as though reassessing a threat category. "So this is your battlefield," she said at last. The human gave a small nod. "Every conversation," he replied, "is an opportunity." And not a single general laughed. The Queen's expression shifted imperceptibly. Her circlet pulsed faintly, adjusting to neural signals she hadn't expected to be challenged. She leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on the polished armrests. Every eye in the court was on the human, measuring, questioning, recalibrating the threat he posed. "You speak as though your species has mastered subtlety," she said, her voice low and precise. "And yet you sit before me without a fleet, without legions, without visible power. How do you plan to impose your influence?" The human tilted his head, lips curling into a faint smile that suggested amusement rather than arrogance. "Influence does not require intimidation, Your Majesty. It requires understanding, observation, application." A warlord growled softly. "You claim to control outcomes without force. That is impossible." "Not impossible," the human replied evenly. "Efficient." He lifted a hand slightly, counting points on his fingers. "We analyze the environment. We assess desires. We predict reactions. We negotiate from the center of leverage, not from the edge of a sword." The Queen's gaze sharpened. "Predict reactions? Are you saying you can anticipate an empire's decisions?" "Sometimes," he said. "Often, in fact. Because people, even rulers, are predictable when their wants are exposed." The chamber shifted uneasily. Several generals whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile centuries of conquest with a human who spoke of war as suggestion and seduction. "Give me an example," the Queen demanded. He smiled faintly. "Trade negotiations. Entire planetary economies realigned without a single bombardment. Markets dominated because they wanted our goods. Cultures influenced because they admired our stories. Leaders convinced to change policies because their populations desired what we offered." A young noble frowned. "You make it sound effortless." "Effortless?" the human replied softly. "No. It's meticulous. Precise. Calculated. But it is far less destructive than your battles, and far more enduring." One of the elder generals bristled. "You are describing conquest disguised as courtesy." The human nodded slowly. "Call it what you like. I call it strategy." The Queen's eyes lingered on him, considering. "And what of those who resist?" "Resistance is part of the design," he replied. "We adapt. We offer alternative incentives. We reframe narratives. Occasionally, we outlast opposition. Rarely, we escalate, but escalation is the exception, not the rule." "Persistence," one of the scholars whispered. "Subtle dominance over time." "Exactly," the human said. "We fight wars every day, but rarely with weapons. We fight with persuasion, with charm, with ideas. Campaigns, conquests, influence, they are all battles. And yet, fewer casualties, more loyalty." The Queen leaned back slowly, absorbing his words. "You treat every interaction as a battlefield. Every interaction has consequences," he said. "Every decision is a maneuver. Every relationship a negotiation. You see aggression as the primary measure of strength. We see adaptability." The court fell silent. Some of the younger nobles were already scribbling notes, calculating possibilities. Several generals tensed, and used to the idea of a species winning without traditional warfare. "You manipulate media?" one admiral asked cautiously. "Not manipulate," the human corrected. "We communicate. We persuade. We inform. Ideas are the most effective weapon when people adopt them willingly." The Queen's brow lifted slightly. "And alliances?" "We engineer them carefully," he replied. "Mergers, partnerships, mutual interests. Sometimes affection, sometimes mutual ambition, sometimes both. Your empire excels in conquest by force, we excel in conquest by consent." A few of the younger courtiers laughed quietly, incredulous. Consent? You mean bribery? No, the human said evenly. Alignment. Desire. Shared advantage. When people act in your interest voluntarily, they sustain it. That is far more durable than compliance enforced through fear. The Queen's voice was measured, almost thoughtful. And you claim all this is humanity's method? Not all, he said, but it is characteristic. Humans survive adversity because we fight every day, in ways that are invisible, adaptable, and intelligent. Political, economic, cultural, personal, we are always waging campaigns. And your victories? She pressed. Do they last? They last as long as they are maintained, he replied. Which is considerably longer than the fallout of conventional wars. Structures endure. Loyalty endures. Influence compounds. A general muttered under his breath. You are redefining war. Exactly, the human said calmly. War is no longer measured in destruction, but in alignment. Strategy outweighs aggression. Insight outweighs force. And the human species has refined this to a precise art. The Queen regarded him in silence, her circlet pulsing faintly as if considering whether to recalibrate her understanding of strength. So, she said at last, humans wage war without soldiers? Without fleets if possible, he corrected. Without violence if possible. The most effective war is the one that is never recognized as war at all. Her eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. And yet you expect my empire to respect such methods? The human inclined his head slightly. Respect is earned through results, Your Majesty. And results speak louder than fleets. Silence settled across the hall, thick and deliberate. Not a single voice dared to challenge the human. The Queen's lips curved almost imperceptibly, the smallest acknowledgement that her assessment of him had shifted. You speak of wars humanity has fought, she said quietly. And none involved bloodshed? Some did, he admitted. But most are won in ways your empire has yet to master. Influence, persuasion, negotiation, charm, all weapons of the modern human. Fleets are optional. The court processed this. Generals exchanged uneasy glances. Scholars whispered notes furiously. Nobles began to rethink centuries of doctrine. The human continued undeterred. We understand violence. We wield it if necessary. But our preferred battlefield is subtle, pervasive, and enduring. We win wars by making victory feel like choice. The Queen's gaze held him, her voice quieter now, but firm. So you have fought many wars and yet sit before me unarmed? I have, he replied simply. And you will notice that the most effective victories are the ones no one realizes have been won. A heavy pause filled the chamber. Even the air seemed to wait. The Queen leaned back, measured, silent. Her court hung on the edge of realization. The human smiled faintly, confident, precise, and unyielding. He had demonstrated that victory did not always require violence, yet the weight of that understanding pressed upon the empire like a subtle but undeniable force. No one laughed this time. No one scoffed. Every mind in the hall recognized, for the first time, that the human had shifted the rules entirely. The Queen straightened in her throne, the faint pulse of her circlet echoing the rhythm of a mind reevaluating everything it had assumed. She folded her hands and studied the human with the same scrutiny that had once reduced lesser species to trembling obedience. Every gesture, every measured breath of his was deliberate, controlled, unnervingly confident. So this is your strategy, she said, her voice steady, cool. You avoid fleets, you avoid armies, you avoid confrontation, yet you claim victory? The human inclined his head slightly. We wage wars differently, Your Majesty. Our weapons are subtle, but effective. Influence, persuasion, negotiation. Culture, commerce, communication. All battlefields, all victories, all sustained. A noble whispered, almost in disbelief. They conquer without force? They align voluntarily, the human clarified. That is the difference. Alignment is loyalty without resentment, influence without rebellion. The Queen's eyes narrowed. And this, you say, is a human trait? Characteristic, he corrected. We survive adversity because we fight daily, on multiple fronts, with brains, wit, and charm. We campaign in politics, conquests in commerce, and victory in the hearts and minds of those around us. All battles are not fought with weapons. A warlord bristled. You speak in riddles. You evade confrontation, yet call it conquest? Conquest, the human said evenly, is the result. How it is achieved is secondary. If submission is willing, the victory is complete. If influence secures cooperation, the war is won without conflict. That is efficiency. The queen leaned forward, her voice sharper. And dominance? Do you wield dominance? Only where necessary, he replied. But dominance imposed by force is temporary. Dominance achieved through persuasion is enduring. We prefer voluntary order to enforced obedience. She studied him closely. You measure power differently than my empire. Because we measure outcomes, not intimidation, he said. Every interaction is a potential battlefield. Every agreement a campaign. Every relationship a negotiation. Victory comes from influence, not fear. The chamber murmured. Scholars whispered interpretations, generals recalculated doctrines, young nobles scribbled notes, furiously. Even the queen's advisers shifted uneasily, realizing centuries of military wisdom were being challenged by subtle words. And what of resistance? She asked. When persuasion fails? Then we adapt, he said. We reframe, offer alternative incentives, change the environment. Rarely escalation occurs, but it is the exception, not the rule. Most of our victories are secured without raising a blade. The queen considered. You call it soft power? Precisely, he said. Soft, but precise. Lethal in consequence, though invisible in execution. The human species fights wars the way you breathe, constantly, subtly, strategically. Her gaze lingered, sharp and calculating. And your most decisive victories? They are the ones no one realizes have been fought, he replied. The wars we win are often invisible. Societies align with us willingly. Economies restructure themselves. Cultures adopt our influence. We secure obedience not through fear, but through desire. A scholar's voice trembled slightly. You weaponize charm, strategy, and ideas. Yes, the human confirmed. We fight battles daily. We do not conquer cities. We conquer attention, loyalty, preference, and influence. The most effective weapon is subtle, pervasive, and enduring. The queen's lips pressed together. And what do you expect of my empire? Respect, he said. For results. For strategy. For understanding that power need not be demonstrated through destruction. We do not seek to topple you. We seek alignment where mutual benefit exists. The war is won when cooperation becomes choice. She tilted her head, her gaze calculating. So humans can win wars without firing a shot. Exactly, he said simply. And you will notice, Your Majesty, that the victories gained quietly are the ones that endure. Your empire may crush planets and bend systems, but influence secures legacy. The queen's eyes softened just enough to acknowledge the weight of his words. You propose that humanity is an equal in subtlety and strategy. We are, he replied. We fight with brains, wit, and charm. Our wars are enduring because they are chosen. We wage campaigns that are invisible, and victories that are lasting. Silence filled the chamber. Not a laugh. Not a scoff. Not a single whisper. The court, the generals, the nobles, the scholars, they all understood, at once, the quiet force standing before them. The queen's voice, when she finally spoke, was measured and deliberate. The empire recognizes humanity as a strategic equal. The human inclined his head slightly. We prefer partners to adversaries. She studied him another moment, then slowly reclined into her throne. The hum of the circlet pulsed softly, almost contemplative. The weight of centuries of conquest had shifted in the span of a conversation. The human had demonstrated that wars could be waged without armies, that victories could be secured without bloodshed, that influence and intellect could outmatch force and fear. And for the first time, the court understood that the human before them was not merely a diplomat. He was a strategist who had weaponized charm, wit, and subtlety. The Empire had faced no fleets, no soldiers, no missiles. Yet the human had won, quietly, efficiently, irreversibly. No one laughed. No one mocked. The lesson was clear, the victory complete, and the rules had changed forever.